Hello and welcome to the Squared Up V4 training webinar series. This episode we're going to focus on high availability. My name is Matthew Long and I'm joined today by Adam Kinniburgh.
Hi there.
Adam is our support test and systems manager and he's going to take us through HA.
So today we'll talk about high availability in general. We did this for V3 just over a year ago, but quite a bit's changed. So we'll recap some of the considerations, some of the basic troubleshooting, but fundamentally we're just going to highlight the enhancements to high availability.
So just as I noted there, if you're currently using V3, this is the wrong webinar. Go back and look on our YouTube channel for the V3 versions talk. Much is still similar, but there are some differences, so it's worth making sure you're watching the right video.
Yeah, so fundamentally it does the same thing. So you would use HA if you wanted to distribute Squared Up over a number of servers. This gives you multiple access points, so users on server 1, users on server 2, maybe one in your primary site, one in a DR site, that kind of thing. It also gives you the opportunity to load balance those connections. So if you do have a large license and you have a lot of users, you can split that load across multiple servers. All the content configuration is shared, so it means you're not managing multiple instances. It's still just one Squared Up, but any changes you make on one server appear on all the others.
Excellent. So there are a couple of considerations, sort of like how you should use this and kind of a bit of discussion about load balancing versus redundancy, right?
Yes. I mean, it's one of those things where you're adding complexity. You're adding another server to manage, another, potentially more licensing, that kind of thing. So realistically, if you've got a 10 user license, do you really need to use HA? Chances are there may be other mechanisms that will let you have a backup of Squared Up, for example. Can you restore that quick enough, that kind of thing? So fundamentally, you need to basically look at your business needs and, maybe you have a policy that says all critical applications have to be highly available and you have no option. Multiple locations let you, obviously you can distribute servers. So you might have a Europe server and an America server and give your local users to each site sort of a better performance. Technically as well, Open Access has a sort of memory burden of about 100 megabytes per dashboard that's currently in use. So again, high availability could just be for performance reasons. Maybe you don't have, easy to size virtual machines. Maybe you're still using some physical hardware and you need to actually spread the load. Concurrent logged in users and concurrent Open Access dashboards do create a burden on the server. So it may just be for spec reasons, basically.
And it is worth noticing with some multiple distributed infrastructure, like if you have teams in different sites, remember that ultimately we are a web app. Web traffic scales quite well over sort of slow links and things. So do you actually do a bit of benchmarking there before you add that unnecessary complexity? If a team can access web resources in your primary site just fine, do you really need to have a server local to them, especially since that Squared Up server is going to want to talk to a local management server? So it's all very well and good having a Squared Up server in the East Coast and a Squared Up server in the West Coast, but if your management servers are all on the West Coast, SDK connection being slow across the entire country will actually make their performance worse from the East Coast server than if they just use web traffic across the West Coast server in the first place. Excellent. Okay, so there's a few terms, right?
Yes, exactly right. So when you buy Squared Up, we send you an email with a number of licenses. So you get a primary license, a secondary license, a dev test license. These are effectively instances of Squared Up. So deployments, sorry. So your primary server is always the first one you deploy. And if you're not using, whether you're using HA or not, this will always be the first server and you use your primary key for this. So this is effectively in standalone mode. This is your only server in HA. It's the first one in your deployment effectively.
So everyone, you have to use this. Your primary key is very important to you.
Yes, exactly right. Secondary server, well, similar to the primary, except the secondary. In old HA, that would effectively be they all become sort of dumb in effect in that the content's missing. In V4, it's different. So we do have content on all your servers. They can function independently for a sort of short period. But the secondary server is basically anything that is deployed after the primary that's connecting into that existing instance of Squared Up and becomes a sort of replica of it.
Also worth noting here, the secondary servers, they have a secondary license, don't they?
Yes, that's right.
And that license is missing features and it's missing CALs.
Yeah, exactly.
So what that means is without the primary server license, that secondary server is an ESP license with 5 users.
Yeah, exactly right. So your primary license key is the one that has your named user account. It has all your features, your EAM features, EAM plus features, that kind of thing. And if you don't have a primary server deployed, secondary licenses will always basically work with very limited functionality. And so it's not a case of you can just deploy at multiple servers not using HA. This is purely for high availability.
Excellent. Okay, so that's the two license types, and then we have the third component of HA is the share.
Yeah, so we use a file share basically to store an index. So your in V3 terms, your HA file share would contain all of your dashboards, all of your user-owned content. In V4, we keep all that content locally to your server, but we create an index that's stored on the file share, and that is effectively the communication mechanism that lets one server talk to the other and vice versa. So any changes get pushed into the index, all the other servers read the index, pull the changes down.
Yep, that's also how they do their heartbeating as well.
Yes, exactly. So heartbeats are just a sort of, as they sound, a sort of simple mechanism where the primary server basically writes into the index that it is alive and the key that's being used on it, and providing that key matches with your secondary license keys and is within a sort of time limit, your secondary servers stay up and running.
So that time Adam mentioned there is 5 days.
Yes, that's right.
So basically what happens is the primary server gives all of its features and cals to the secondary servers, as Adam says, as long as they match its license type. In the absence of a primary server heartbeat, they'll continue to operate with the last set of features that they had from that primary for 5 days.
Yeah.
After that, they will shut down and say, that's it, I can't communicate anymore.
Exactly.
That's it, you're gone.
There are steps that we'll talk about later. There are steps that you can take if you are in a disaster situation and you can't get your primary server back online within 5 days. There are things we can help you with. But yeah, fundamentally, that's a sort of typical time that you may fail over. Even if it's not how long your outage is, you move functionality to another server, you may not instantly want to jump back over, that sort of thing. So you get roughly sort of a business week.
Yeah, which is plenty of grace period given how quickly our support reacts to sort of things like license requests and stuff.
Exactly.
Okay, so that's sort of the text form. Let's see it in the diagram form. It makes it a bit clearer.
So yeah, like I said, so the first thing you deploy is a primary server. So you can see there, it's a server running an application. We've got some nice little icons to show your dashboards and an icon to denote the index file. So that's sort of database icon. Yep. The first thing you do is deploy your file share. So this is just, we've sort of mentioned it on the last slide, but didn't talk about it. It's just a standard Windows file share with permissions granted to the app pool account. So if you're using network service, it's the server name with a $. On the end. If you're running as a service account, it would be the service account needs write permissions to the share.
Yep. So, and at this point, you basically haven't enabled HA yet. You just have a standalone server and a file share.
Exactly right. Exactly. So when you enable HA, and again, the command that lets you turn it on is all documented. We effectively move the index into the file share, and it no longer exists locally. So all the files stay local, but we have a .index file that lives on the share that effectively, well, as it sounds, it's an index of the content.
And that contains, not only does it have the content, it also has like the heartbeat, what versions of all the servers are, that kind of stuff. So
for V3 customers, if you've ever looked in your HA file share, you'll see a bunch of content, loads of configuration files, all your dashboards, locking files, heartbeat files, all that sort of stuff. That's all condensed now into a sort of nice transactional index file.
Yep. And if you deleted that file, the primary would just recreate it.
Yep, exactly right.
Keep working. So now we've got a single server. It's configured for HA, but it's not really highly available at this point, is it? So we need to add nodes.
Yes, exactly. So you would deploy a secondary, and by default, we ship our secondary license keys with 3 activations. So you could deploy 3 of these if you wanted to.
And if you want to have more than 3 nodes, you just contact support.
Exactly right. So we're not limiting it, but obviously it's there is a consideration to be made around how many you actually need, what the purpose is, that kind of thing. So you'll see here again, there's currently no content on this server. It's a fresh deployment of squared up. But there is an index locally. So when we run the HA command on the secondary server now, we effectively just discard that index file and we point the secondary server at the index on the file share. And in turn, that then allows the secondary to write all of those local files that the primary already has. So the files are unique to each server. The content's the same in them, but each server owns its own files and the index is purely used to keep them all in sync.
Which also means now, again, big departure from V3 days, if you lose your file share, you don't actually lose your content.
No, exactly. So if you, without a file share in V3, you effectively have a sort of fresh instance of squared up. It's unconfigured. There are no dashboards, no perspectives. Nothing you've made yourself is there. But in V4, we do now have all of your content permanently on all of your servers. So if the index is missing, it can be rebuilt, but equally all the content stays where it's supposed to be.
Yeah. So from a sort of recovery sort of scenario, if Meteor hits your primary data center, kills off the primary server, kills off the file share, the secondary, after being promoted to a primary, has all your content and is ready to go.
Exactly. So everything is there. We get asked questions about DFS quite a lot. We don't formally support DFS, especially now with a sort of a transactional index. It does have to be locked and unlocked by servers as they're reading and writing, and DFS doesn't take that into account. But because the index is really just a sync mechanism now, it is less critical. There are still some steps you'd need to take. For example, if you lost the primary site and your file server, you would need to effectively disable HA on your secondary and get in touch with us so we can let you reactivate the secondary with your primary key, effectively making it a primary server. But all the content's already there. You don't need necessarily the file share to exist everywhere that the squared up servers exist.
Yeah, so to clarify, the file share for autonomous operations, in the sense that if it put a load balancer in front of it, I could knock any component out and immediately the thing just still keeps working.
Yeah.
Your file share is a single point of failure. You will have to do manual intervention if you lose your file share.
Yes, exactly.
However, your content is still stored everywhere.
Exactly.
And as long as your file share is highly available, even if it isn't being replicated, it's highly available, your servers still work. And if you lose the share, but your primary is still online, all you have to do is point the primary at a new share location, and the thing just builds and continues to work.
It'll rebuild the index. It's worth noting. So if you lose the share with version 3, you are effectively suffering a data loss unless you have a backup. All of your content is gone. With version 4 though, your content does exist everywhere.
Yep. Now Adam mentioned that we don't formally support DFS. He's running up the support team, so he can't say. He has to say that. What I'll tell you is that it might work, but your mileage will vary significantly based on your performance of your setup, the kind of hardware and software you're using. It would also vary what kind of model that you're using, because some people will configure HA for load balancing, which means that they're going to use a active setup, in which case replication times and things are very important. If you are doing this as a part of a DR scenario, though, where you're doing this so that you can easily fail over, and your load balancer is configured to send everyone to the primary normally, and then send to the secondary only if the primary is unavailable, you can use DFS in that sort of scenario, because there's no changes being made to the secondary. It will replicate as fast as it can, and you won't have any locking issues because there's never any data coming the other way back into the share. So, and that's the same with things like using systems like double take to replicate the contents of the share somewhere else, or whatever you want to use to replicate the contents of that share. So yeah, your mileage may vary on that one, but officially all we support there for the share is going to be a highly available share using something like failover clustering to achieve that.
During development of V4, we did quite a bit of testing around our new index file using things like Windows DFSR, and we did find that in quite a number of cases, the replicated index was significantly behind the live index on the sort of the main file share copy. It would catch up when you stopped making changes on the primary, but it wasn't live and it couldn't be, basically. So yeah, we won't officially support it, but you can use it in certain situations.
Absolutely. Okay, so we've talked about considerations a bit, and obviously we missed the point there about adding a load balancer, but once you've got this HA set up, you probably want to put a load balancer in place.
Yeah.
And that load balancer should obviously also be fault tolerant, otherwise that's your single point of failure too. So that's the this is what the typical setup. And then the main consideration then to go forward is authentication and things. So we keep saying about considerations. Let's actually cover those off.
Yes. So I mean, the first one, this was very important for V3, was is SCOM highly available? So in V3, all your config was on the share. It was shared between both servers, so you could only configure a single address effectively for SCOM. So if your connections file specified a SCOM management server, both squared up servers would use it, and if that server management server went down, you would lose access to SCOM. Obviously, if SCOM is load balanced, you're fine. And with version 4, there are node specific configuration options for high availability. So you will be able to say node 1 has to use SCOM 1, node 2 can use SCOM 2.
The other option you have here is if you're installing your SCOM servers on your management servers, you can configure the connection string for them to be local host, in which case not only will it be resilient, because funnily enough the service exists on every server, it'll also be quite quick because all the squared up servers are going to use the local box for this. This is also very helpful if you're doing HA, because if you're doing HA and using a load balancer and you're using Windows auth, the thing you'll have to immediately tackle with is Kerberos constraint delegation.
Boo.
Yeah, so that's point 3 on this, but I'm going to talk about this sort of now because this is sort of the elephant in the room. If you've really struggled to get constrained delegation working in the past in your environment, and you're using Windows Auth for Squared Up, our number one advice to you is put Squared Up on your management servers. You already have more than one management server anyway to make SCOM HA. If you don't, please get more than one SCOM management server. So that just avoids that double hop issue immediately, and it'll also solve the problem Adam was saying they've all Squared Up trying to connect to a single server. Yep. If you want to, if your SCOM management servers are already overloaded, there's nothing to stop you installing a new SCOM management server and just don't assign any agents to it, don't put any workloads on it, and have it just run Squared Up. At which point, effectively, it will just sit there and act as sort of a portal for Squared Up, and that works quite well as well. So we can definitely recommend doing that if you want to avoid the Kerberos constrained delegation issue, or go Forms Auth. That also works too.
Yeah, I mean, Squared Up is still and always has been sort of lightweight enough to stick on a management server without too much of a burden. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And then we got the sort of is your file storage infrastructure highly available? That really is the file share, right? Like if you it's less with V3 because we're replicating the files onto every copy. It's less about now how will you keep your data online. You should be doing backups anyway. Just fact, you should be doing that because no kind of HA or replication system we can provide will help you if someone goes and deletes all your team folders, realistically.
Yeah.
So you need to do backup anyway. And because Squared Up is so easily restored, because it is just files on disk, realistically, the file storage point there is really about can you keep that share online? Because if you can't keep that share online, that is going to cause problems and introduce a single point of failure and extra complexity. And realistically, Squared Up is a monitoring product. It's supposed to be easy and not another thing you have to manage. So it may well be better for you not to do HA and say, well, if we're taking snapshots and backups, if we have a failure, we'll wait 10 minutes for the thing to restore.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good point. I get that sort of all goes back to, I suppose, your business considerations. Like, do you need it to be on 99.99% of the time, or if something does happen to Squared Up, is it sufficient to just be able to spend 5 minutes installing a fresh build of Squared Up and restoring the content from a backup?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, especially because like these days with snapshot, like I would assume for most of you that Squared Up is running on a virtual machine. You have plenty of options there for replicating a virtual machine, whether that's using sort of Veeam, whether that's using the native features of your hypervisor. So that's, migrations. You can do snapshots of your VMs before you're doing upgrades and testing. You could use Azure Site Recovery and have the thing being constantly sent up to the cloud and synced there. So that you have an awful lot of options now for this thing has died. I can bring it up, even automatically in some cases. So really, realistically, really look at this and say, am I doing this for load scaling or am I doing this for fault tolerance?
Yeah.
Because you have a number of different options that you could use that mean you don't have to mess with all sort of stuff.
And like you said, with it being files on disk, you don't have to worry about crash consistency or anything. So you can do very simple cold replicas to other sites or, that kind of thing. It's not transactional. The live system isn't transactional. It's only the index that is.
Absolutely. And the last point there is, am I performing automated dashboard edits? So this is a fun one. In V3 and in V4, all your dashboards sit as files on disk. Now in V3 or in V4 standalone, because all your dashboards lived in one place, that was the authoritative source for you making edits. If you change a file on disk there, all the Squared Up servers that are using that content now replicate that change. So you could use a script to automatically provision dashboards or make edits in the JSON or whatever you wanted to do. That is no longer true in V4 because in V4 now, all the servers have a copy of this. So if you're using automation like part of a source control sort of flow, so I'm going to have all my changes made via source control and my users can't directly edit in the system. Or if you're going to do automatic provisioning, say you're a hoster and you're going to run a script to deploy new dashboards and management packs when a new tenant comes online, or you're just going to, your organization with massive number of users, massive number of teams, and you're going to, again, script this sort of stuff as part of an enrollment procedure. So when a new project gets spun up, we go and splat a whole bunch of new dashboards and things in for that team. If you're doing this stuff, our number one piece of advice to you is choose a single server. That is your authoritative server. That's where you make changes to that system. And that means then when you need to hit the reload all content button to make those changes appear live in the product, same as you used to have to do in V3, when you do that, when you click that button or when you recycle the app pool, that server uses its local copy of files and splats the content of the index with whatever's there. So it becomes authoritative, basically. So if you have these automated changes or even just end user changes being made across multiple different servers, what will happen is when you then say to server A, okay, right, now you write all your content, if something had been written to server B but not propagated to all the rest yet, it's now destroyed and gone. So if you want to avoid data loss issues, we really recommend that you go with a model where all your automated edits happen on a single server. Adds and edits are relatively safe. Deletes are hard. There's some issues sort of with doing that, or some complexities to doing that. So we would highly recommend that if you want to, have automatic enrollment via scripting, that's relatively easy. If you want to do automated like deletion of files and things like that, come into support and chat to us first, because there's some things you really sort of need to know about doing that. We don't really have time to cover in this webinar, unfortunately, but all that stuff doesn't exist when you're in standalone mode, but it is a concern for HA. So again, if that's a really big thing you want to do, come over the chat with us and maybe you'll decide that HA isn't for you and you'll use an alternative strategy to achieve fault tolerance squared up.
Yeah, okay. Chances are as well, if you're using automated deployment of your content, you probably have some level of change control in there as well. So like you said, Matthew, if you want to load new content that hasn't been created through the UI, you do have to click reload all. However, if you are automating it and you do have a window to deploy it, an app pull recycle sort of does the same thing. But again, a single server, deploy the content, recycle the app pull or hit reload, and it then updates the index.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so that's sort of a lot of the considerations and tech. Now we'll look at how you enable it. Now, normally, as you know, we're very demo heavy. We love doing demos. This is running a single command demo. So we're not kind of going to waste your time showing you a command prompt and a 10-second command to run. The important point to take away from this is if you go to our documentation, go to deployment, how to configure high availability, there is a lovely doc about this. It's not too long. The actual command is quite simple. It is, there we go, squared up HA and a path to the share and the user account that you're going to use for the app pull. So as Adam said, either the computer account or it'll be the service account you've nominated. That is basically you actually configuring a server for HA. It's that simple. But it is worth reading this guide. It's not super long-winded, but it does talk about some of the sort of complexities and things that you really should understand, especially to do with things like how long, so what will happen when the primary goes unavailable and things like that, and sort of share permissions and stuff like that. So it's definitely worth reading this guide and actually taking a look through it so you understand all the different operations. And it also talks about things like performing upgrades on servers while you're using HA. So going from 4.0 to 4.1, or what you need to do if you need to disable HA or move the share somewhere else or back up and restore it. So these are all kind of operations that I think you should be aware of before you then go ahead and actually go and enable it. So take a read, see what you think. Okay, so you know how to enable HA, you know the considerations. Sort of final point I want to touch on before we wrap up is troubleshooting. So there's a couple of different things to check, but the number one issue in your experience, Adam, for sort of HA not working properly is?
Well, it's the secondary server basically becoming unlicensed, or dropping down to 5 named users. Very common in HA scenarios. That is the most common thing. I'm on my secondary server. I've only got 5 named users. People can't log in anymore. It's typically because, like we mentioned, if the secondary server can't read heartbeats from the primary, it effectively becomes an unlicensed limited feature box until you restore that connectivity. So the first thing that always needs to be checked are the file share permissions. Maybe you've changed the app pool identity and haven't updated the file share. And because you get those 5 days, there is a bit of a disconnect almost between, changes being made to things and the actual effect being seen. So yeah, it's very common. Just check that your file share permissions are correct. And again, it's just that the app pool identity for each server has read and write access to it.
So likewise, if you change your permissions, you decide that you're going to use a different server's account, make sure you change it on the secondary too, and update the share permissions, things like that.
Exactly. And a really simple check if you have sort of very tiered access to your infrastructure. Create a dashboard on one server and see if it appears on the other. Very simple check to see whether HA is working or not. If it does, HA fundamentally is working. And there may be other things. As always, support@squaredup.com and we'll get sort of straight on it. But yeah, definitely check the share permissions, create a dashboard, and then after that, sort of get in touch.
Cool. And so in terms of like digging a bit deeper, so the main thing to look for in the logs is the heartbeats, right?
Yeah, exactly. So even though we're not writing dedicated heartbeat files like we used to in V3, the log entries are still the same. So if you take a look in the squared up log, which is in the squared up directory, transient log, and just search the file for updating HA heartbeat, or on the secondary verifying heartbeat. If you see those or you see error messages around the word heartbeat,
something's up.
There's a problem.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that's nice and easy. But yeah, otherwise get in touch with us and we'll
Exactly.
we'll take a look. Okay, so we've come to time. So thank you for joining us, guys. Hopefully that's answered everything you need to know about HA. If you've got questions, please let us know in the chat. If you're watching this on YouTube, then obviously post questions in the comments or reach out to Adam's Obvious support team, and we will endeavour to answer any of your questions. Thank you for joining us on this webinar. Thank you, Adam.
Thank you very much.
And have a great day, guys.